I'm Mr. Post, and today I'm going to be showing you how to take a positive and negative space robot image on paper and turn that into a positive and negative space robot image on clay. Okay, the first step today in making our clay slab is to take some clay and squeeze it in your hands kind of into the shape that we'd like this tile to become at the end. So I'm just kind of squeezing this clay into a rectangular patty. I've got a piece of brown canvas down here, and what this does is it keeps the clay from sticking to the tabletop. We're also going to use two 3/8 inch dowels, and these act as spacers so that the clay can't get too thin. And with kids, that's always a big problem for them, is getting the clay too thin. What I'd like you to do at this point is take your clay and do what's called the CPR move, and that is where you put one hand on top of the other while you're standing and just push down the way that you've seen people do CPR on television. And what this does is it starts to flatten out the clay. You can take the clay and flip it over. And so once the clay is flipped over, you can do a little more CPR. If you're a kid, it's especially important to be standing because your body weight helps to push this clay around. The next step in this process is to take a rolling pin, and what we're going to do with the rolling pin is we're going to flatten this clay some more. And so we roll back and forth with the rolling pin. Partway through this process, it helps to take the clay and flip it over. As you can see, the moisture on the canvas is from the clay, and this keeps the clay from sticking too much to the canvas. So when you flip it, you let the clay roll out a little bit more easily. And so once you hear the sound of the rolling pin rolling on the sticks, that's a pretty good indication that you've reached the final thickness for the tile. The next step is to take a cardboard template, and this one matches the size of the tile we're making. It's 5 inches by 7 inches, and we're going to cut with this plastic knife along the edges of this tile. These extras just get returned to the scrap bag. And then one of the things that I like to do as part of this process is get this slab onto a sheet of paper so that we can carry it around in the art room. And before you do that, it's helpful to write your name onto the slab and then the class code for the class that you're in. Once you've got that done, you can take your slab and just lay a piece of paper over the top of it. It can be newsprint, construction paper, paper towel, and flip it upside down like this. And so now your name is on the back of that tile, and you've got a nice surface to work on. This is the part of the process where we get to use the paper as a stencil. And so the easiest way to get the paper to stick to the clay is to pick up the larger pieces of your robot and dip them into some water, shake them out a little bit, and then position them onto the clay slab where it goes. And then there's a little household sponge, just a little square of household sponge. What that is used for is to dab up any excess water. And so I like to do the large parts of this first, just dipping them and placing them into the correct position on the clay tile, and then dabbing up the excess water. And this part goes rather quickly if you've made your robot parts large. If you've made them small, they're a little more difficult to grab, but I'll show you a trick to do that when we get to the smaller parts of this one. Okay, when you get to these smaller parts, it sometimes is hard to pick them up. So what I have here is a popsicle stick that's got a paper clip that has been electrical taped onto it. And what this does is it acts as a little tool that lets me pick up pieces. I just dip it in the water, and then the piece sticks to it, and then I can position it where I'd like. And dab it over the top. And so the water makes the paper stick, these smaller chunks. Makes it easier for you to lift them up off of the black construction paper and get them onto your tile. It's especially helpful for these little hole punched circles because they're very tiny, and I don't dip these in the water. What I do with these is I just place them on there and go over the top with a sponge, and the sponge moistens them enough so that they stick to the clay. The next step in this process is to put some clay slip over the top of the entire tile, and I like to start with a small brush, and the reason I do that is what you want to do is just gently layer some of this slip on here into the areas where you see clay. What you don't want to do is have the slip slide in underneath your paper stencils, and so by using a small brush over the small areas, it makes it a little bit easier to avoid the temptation to brush the slip. And if you brush the slip, that's when it can slide in underneath your paper, and once it does that, then your paper stencil isn't working the way that you want it to. It's not blocking the slip from getting on the tile. So the first step for me is to just go around and take all of the smaller areas, the smaller negative spaces where you see the clay peeking through your paper cuts, and go over the top of those with the paintbrush. Then a larger brush can be used to come in and fill these larger spaces. And so once I've done the small areas, that's when I'll come in over the top and dab it with the larger brush. Now the goal here is not to leave this thing all streaked with different brush strokes so that the brush strokes are visible. You kind of want this slip to go on here evenly as possible. And so if I was to start brushing this right now, what might happen is I might pick up some of the color from the iron oxide that's in the red terracotta clay below, and I certainly don't want that to happen. I want this slip to be very white against the dark clay when it gets fired in the kiln. And so the nice thing about having this on paper, on a piece of paper or newsprint or construction paper, is that when you're done, you can easily lift this tile and carry it out of your workspace. At the end of the first day, what we've got is a clay tile with paper shapes on top of it. Slip is brushed over the top of that, and then this tile is very wet today, so it needs to sit. And I like to let these sit until they're bone dry, and so that's usually the next week when the kids come back to art. And once they've got the bone dry tiles, that's when we'll take a little push pin and lift up the paper to reveal the image below. Thanks for watching. Go make something. I hope you had fun.